Hi and welcome. I'm the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Gaver, Presbyterian minister of 3 congregations in Eastern Ontario, and thank you for joining us for this week's Puzzles in Faith. This week's question is, when will the world end? When is the end of the world coming? You're probably going, oh no, not another crackpot predicting the end of the world. Well, I'll leave that to your decision, your judgment. In the Bible, we have a type of literature that's called apocalyptic. As far as I am sure of, there's only one book that is really an apocalyptic book, and that's the book of Revelation. But there are apocalyptic passages elsewhere in the Bible, in Daniel, Ezekiel, and also in some of the books that didn't make it into the Bible. And they give us signs about when the world's going to end. One of the most famous signs is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the 4 horsemen. And you have war and pestilence or famine, economic collapse. That can be interpreted in different ways in different passages, but that seems to be the main thrust. And then when we look at what's happening today, we say, oh my God, I'm living at the end times. The pandemic has certainly led to some economic chaos, and famine could be around the corner because people aren't farming as much, and the truck drivers and trains were not getting the food to the market as quickly because of all the social distancing and other restrictions. And so we're going to have a famine, and then of course war. Well, when haven't we had war? And actually that's the whole point. When hasn't there been an age where there's been economic uncertainty, war, famine, and pandemics? We can go every period, and every generation tends to think they're living in the last days. And we have lots of people predicting, giving absolute dates. I remember, I think it was Jean Dixon who was predicting 1968. Edgar Casey was in there predicting, I think California would sink in 69. Then, of course, we had a whole slew around 2000, and then 2012. And this sounds a little ambiguous, doesn't it? That so many dates. Well, I want to share a screen with you of a website I love, and that's helped me in this search for the end of the world. So just a second. This site is called religionstolerance.org. And if you look down here, you see they have prophecies of Teotihuacan, however you want to say it, which is simply the end of the world as we know it. And at the very bottom of that page, they give you prophecies about when the world was predicted that it was going to end. So if we go back here to prior to 1921, we see there were 46 failed prophecies around the time of Jesus, up towards an eclipse in 968, 1000 January 1st, that's your millennials again, then up into the 1346s and 1496s and 1832s, and then we keep going and going and going. And they have page after page after page of when people have predicted the end of the world is coming. And they'll tell you who some of these people are. So Vincent Carthain predicts, and the 20s or 30s, Billy Joy, Harold Lindsay. Oh my goodness. I read about him back, I think it was in the 70s. He was predicting it back then. 2022, 2023, 2024. And we keep going on and on and on. If we've got so many dates being predicted as the end of the world, and they all seem to fail, they seem to match up perfectly with what we're told to expect, and yet the world doesn't end then, maybe we're looking at it the wrong way. If you remember last week, we were talking about free will, how God created us having freedom of choice. And maybe that freedom of choice comes into play when we're looking at the end of the world. So maybe instead of saying, what date will the end of the world, take place? When is God going to come back? Let's find the date, month, day, and year. Instead of that, let's look at the conditions in which God might appear. Now, on the one hand, we might say, if everything is perfect, or as perfect as it can be without God's physical presence, maybe that's when God will come back. So when most of the world is filled with God's Spirit, when we are known as helping people around the world, wherever they are, and we're just building communities of people, the compassionate, caring communities, people helping one another, maybe that's when God will come back and finish it. That's one possibility. Unfortunately, the book of Revelation and other books suggest that it's going to be a very different picture. It suggests that, in fact, we're going to see a world that turns more and more away from God, and away, not just from God, but from what God wants. That we're going to become more self-centered, more self-absorbed, that when tragedies happen, we just say, oh, well, too bad, that's the way it goes. Good luck, and walk away. And that is so much something that's anathema to what God wants. And when that starts happening and more of God's people start doing things like that, I think that's when God's going to come back. So stop and think. The pandemic is raging in India. It was raging in the States a few months ago, and now it's raging in India. Same numbers. And what is happening? Everyone, all the nations are sending supplies to India. Let's help, let's help. And I think that kind of action pushes the end of the world down the way just a little bit further. Our free will, we've influenced things, and the end of the world is not going to come as soon as it wants. And if something like COVID breaking out in India happens again, and people say, too bad, we'll just close our borders, want nothing more to do, just go ahead and die. And that'll bring the end of the world closer, because that's something God can't stand. For us to be so selfish and self-absorbed that we let our brothers and sisters suffer and die. So when will the end of the world come? In some ways, it's up to us, because God's given us free will to shape the future as we choose. Thank you. And once again, I'm the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Gaver, and thank you for joining us for this week's Puzzles and Faith. Take care and God bless. Bye-bye.